That thing there is my bushcraft camp. Started out with just a small wall about this long. Over the years I built it up, I built different shelters, I built different structures, and this is what it turned out to be like. Pretty much a kid's fort, oversized kid's fort, but it was great fun along the way. I made about 17 episodes called the Bushcraft Camp Update series, and if you want to start at episode 1, just type in YouTube Bushcraft Camp Update and then whichever number you want to watch. But I realised over the years as I was building this that I never actually did a tour video. I never showed you guys, my viewers, around the camp itself. I just filmed myself being there. So this is a bit of a camp special where I'm going to take the camera, give you a tour, and actually talk about some of the, you know, the positives and negatives about doing something like this, and also the problems that I came across whilst building certain structures there. But I learned a hell of a lot along the way, so come with me and let's take a tour around the camp. The camp idea all started really with this fire reflector or heat reflector. I had already previously built an A-frame shelter, just a simple A-frame shelter with sticks, and I'd put some bracken on top of it. Then I built this fire reflector to bounce the heat from the fire back into that A-frame shelter. This is really the catalyst that started the whole Bushcraft Camp Update series. And I always look at this wall sometimes when I'm in camp just to remind me of where it all began and where it all started. Just a simple wall with, I don't know, 7 logs or something, about pocket height, and that was enough to bounce that heat back to that shelter. And I enjoyed making the wall, just building this fire reflector. But that was the inspiration for the camp itself. This is where things basically went a bit crazy. I then went on to build a couple more walls, which I'll show you now. In Camp Update 2, Episode 2, I built this second wall. However, it was here, and then I had another wall here, which I eventually changed to a small shelter. So essentially I was just rounding off this corner because that's where the prevailing wind was coming from over there, and it's just to try and kill off that wind so that it wouldn't just burn through my fire really quickly. But that was the sort of second and third wall essentially of the camp. In Camp Update 3, I improved the A-frame shelter. There is no longer an A-frame shelter in this camp, but I did improve the shelter, and I remember making it wider just to allow more room to move around in the shelter itself. After Bushcraft Camp Update 3, I wanted to do something a little bit better and put a little bit more effort into the videos themselves. And that's when I started to create cinematic intros to my videos. I hadn't seen many people do it before. In fact, I don't think I'd seen anyone in the kind of bushcraft and outdoor community on YouTube certainly doing these cinematic intros. So I decided that was the route I was gonna go down, and that at the beginning of every Bushcraft Camp Update episode I would have a cinematic, you know, movie style trailer. So that was inspired from Camp Update 3, I think, onwards, maybe even Camp Update 2, but definitely Camp Update 3 onwards. Camp Update 4 was a significant change to the camp. It was where I turned what was a small kind of camp into a bit more of a fort. That was where the size of the structure changed, and the camp got enlarged a lot more. And I ended up finishing perimeter walls, and I'll show you those now. So in Camp Update 4, I built a solid wall here, another one, and then another one pretty much on the opposite side. So essentially I'd sealed off my camp. And that was a huge part of my project really, because it was, not only was it, you know, improving the camp and making it a lot bigger, but it was also the one video at the time that sort of put TA Outdoors a bit more on the map, and I was getting a bit more recognition. And yeah, I started, the subscribers started flooding in, and I just got a lot more comments on the channel. And that video now, I think Camp Update 4, is on about, I think, 760,000 views. It's slowed right down now because it was filmed many years ago, but at the time, that was my first video, I think, that hit 100,000 views on my channel. So that was always quite special to me as well. And yeah, that kind of turned this place into a fort, and that's where things got out of hand really. In Camp Update 4, I also built this Sawhorse. This made my life so much easier at the camp because it enabled me to stop sawing wood down at ground level, which would hurt my back, and start raising the wood up to around waist height so that I could straighten my back and just get a lot more efficiency out of sawing wood. All this was put together really was with some fishing line, and I just made a few notches as well. It's very rudimentary, it's very basic, but it's lasted me. This is over 3 years old. It's a little bit wobbly still, but it's still going strong. If you're building a camp or you're doing much sawing in the woods for a long period of time, I would highly recommend you build a Sawhorse. In hindsight, I would have liked to have built, which we did at the pallet cabin, another kind of X here to allow, when your wood gets too short, you then can't hold it on the sawing horse rigid. So if you have another extra bit on the end of it, you can then start to saw those smaller pieces. But this made my life a lot easier. And after I built this, I think after Camp Update 5, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, I'll show you, this made things so much better, so much easier. This then leads on to Camp Update 5, which is where I built the first. It was actually a secondary shelter, but it ended up being the shelter that I slept in when I was at camp. And I'll show you that now. This very low down lean-to was Bushcraft Camp Update 5. At the time, I think I called it my secondary shelter because I already had that A-frame. This is probably one of the oldest structures in the camp, and it's still going strong. It's still completely dry and completely waterproof. You can see we've had lots of rain. The ground is very damp here at the moment, but this raised bed is completely dry. I built this using a tarp. I made a cross member here, a couple of cross members. I then put a tarp from here down, just stringed a nice heavy duty tarp there. Then I got loads of logs at about maybe 3-inch diameter, 2.5-inch diameter, and they were back to back all the way along here. On top of that, I added moss for 2 reasons really. One, because it made the structure blend in a lot more to the surroundings rather than just being logs all the time, but also because it would just help prevent that water completely hitting this tarp and making a racket at night. If it was raining, it would hit the moss and it would kill off all the sound. But this has been completely waterproof. If I could change things with this shelter, it would be that it's far too low. If I stand up, you can see it's only up to my waist, so I can't sit down in this shelter. If I do, I can sit down, but I just end up crouching, you can see, and knocking my head. But I did my first solo overnight at this bushcraft camp in this shelter, and that was the second video on my channel which went really big. That was the first video I think that got over 1 million views, where I did a solo overnight and I stayed in this shelter, and that was a really good night. I think it was in December sometime, and I slept really well under there. Had a really good sleep, off and on as you do when you're in the woods sometimes, but I slept pretty well. I was completely dry and temperatures weren't too cold anyway, and I had the fire pit was a little bit more over this way. But that was another huge step, that Camp Update 5, where I built this shelter. I'd also built the walls on the other side as well. That moss was only put on once and it's still there. What it's done is it's grown into those sticks that I put down above the tarp. So I know moss is very slow to regrow. It takes a long time to grow, so you shouldn't harvest huge areas of moss because you can destroy whole colonies. I am aware of that. But I knew that what I was doing when I did this is that moss would eventually grow into the logs itself. And yes, the logs would decompose, but it would also allow that moss to grow and flourish really. And that's what it's done. You can see it's still all very green. It's got loads of pine needles on it at the moment because we're right in the middle of autumn. But that also helps to insulate the shelter because it's given that extra 1/2 foot, maybe 6 inches, extra layer of insulation for those cold winter months. I've had to put stakes in here, about 5 or 6, because the weight of that moss is making all these logs slide away from the shelter and they'll just roll off. So by putting these stakes in, I've hammered them quite deep, they're just stopping those horizontal logs from slipping off and the whole structure sliding. It's just started to rain, but I'm going to carry on with the tour anyway. So Camp Updates 6, 7 and 8 were mostly improvements to the camp itself. I built that small raised bed in the shelter. I'd built a cooking crane called the oars crane, essentially where you lash some sticks together, you have a stake in the ground, and it acts as a crane, a cooking crane that swings in and out, and you can put, I made pot hanger sticks of different heights so that you could hang your billy can or kettle over the fire at different heights depending on the height of the flame. So that was 6, 7 and 8. Camp update 9, I built a log store. It looked exactly like this, but it was on the inside of the camp, and that was one of the downsides when I did that, because it took up this much room in the camp, and it was quite annoying because the camp suddenly felt really cramped. So it wasn't until a later date, well down the line, a few years later, that I moved the log store outside of the camp itself. It's looking a bit sorry for itself now because it's not completely sealed. The rain has come through these gaps. It's got onto the logs, and unfortunately they've started to rot and gone a bit punky, which is okay because there's still plenty of deadfall and dead wood around. But yeah, so this, I didn't really need anything much bigger than this because I wasn't going to be staying here for very long periods of time, a few days at most, and I could just top it up whenever I'm here, just to go out and saw some wood and chop it up to last me enough really for however long I was staying. That was a good change. I remember building the log store and thinking that was a really handy thing to have, and I kind of wish I did the log store earlier on because I was always going off sawing wood, bringing it back, going off sawing wood. I kind of wish in the early stages that I just built a log store and filled it up. It would have made life a lot easier. That was Camp Update 9. In Camp Update 10, that was when we expanded this secondary shelter, and we raised up, we put 3 logs at the back which lifted up that back and allowed a lot more room in there. At that point, I'd also brought my dad to the camp a bit more, and that was the start really of what was called theory time, where at the end of each episode we would come up with a theory, just myself and my dad, and we would just talk to each other about this theory and ask you guys your opinions on it. Most of you will know what I mean by that. That's where theory time was born, Camp Update 10, and we just kind of made basically shelter improvements. The next camp update after 10 obviously was Bushcraft Camp Update 11. That was a huge change for my channel. Most of you, I'd say most of you would know what I'm talking about when I say Camp Update 11 and what I built. It was pretty out there, and that is it. At the time I think I called it the hunting tower. It was a different video to all of the camp updates I'd ever done. I spent a while building it. I kind of thought of it a day before I had this idea, and I thought it was a bit of a bold idea, but I needed to kind of go for it and see what happens. I didn't really know whether I could build it or not. I have no construction experience. I don't really have any woodworking experience, but I just thought, I reckon I could do this. And I just had some ideas in my head and I just went for it. And that was the outcome of essentially the project. I wanted to build a tower. I didn't want to build a tree house. I wanted to build a tower. And I was really pleased with it. And I edited the video and I spent a hell of a lot of time. It's probably the most effort I'd ever put into a video ever. This was probably 2 years ago now, maybe a year ago, maybe just over a year ago now, a year and a half ago probably. And I built a ladder for it and everything, and I made it accessible from inside the camp only, so you can't get into the tower except from the inside. And I'll just quickly show you. I mean, it's big. It's a big tower. The first floor, the floor of the tower, is my head height. So that essentially was one of the hardest things, was to get these huge support posts in. I had to dig down maybe 4 feet. Maybe even, yeah, 4.5, 5 feet. I had to dig down through this peat layer, which is about this thick, then through the soil layer, and then into the gravel, because at the bottom of this forest, it's all gravel. And that took a long time. This was the ladder I built. I made notches again, lashed it. I tried to keep this under that small shelter there to keep it dry, to preserve it. So this ladder has helped me build a lot of other structures in this camp. It's pretty heavy, but yeah, that was a fun side of the project, was building the ladder. Obviously it gave me the opportunity to actually get into the hunting tower itself. And I need to explain, I call it hunting tower at the time because I had planned to do hunting from it. I'd got videos still that I haven't put up of hunting videos from this tower. As I uploaded that video, only, I don't even know, maybe a few months later, YouTube brought in this thing which was a bit of a phenomenon at the time, which was the demonetization scandal. I say scandal, it hit the YouTube community very hard, it hit my channel very hard. And I had a lot of demonetized videos where I'd had hunting videos before where I've been with my friends, and they all got hit. Even some ones here at the camp, they got hit. And yeah, the channel got knocked very hard. I lost 50% of my revenue overnight from that. And at the time, I think I was just about to go or decide to go full-time YouTube. So that was a huge thing that hit me. So I still have videos of a lot more from this tower that none of you have seen, but I'm still debating whether to kind of put them up. Anyway, that's why I called it the hunting tower, because I was essentially going to hunt from it. Now, really, it's a bit more of a lookout tower. I could just get up there and I can see right across the forest, because there's lots of bracken here and you can't really see over when it's in the summer, it's pretty much overhead height and you can't see very far. When you go up there, you can see right into the distance. We get roe deer here, we get fallow, we get badger. We've even got an albino deer, a lovely white albino deer. I think it's a fallow, and that's really impressive. I've seen foxes as well. But let me take you up there just to show you the view. This is the view from the hunting tower. I've got the roof here. It's a 360-degree view. You can see the lovely autumn colours over in that deciduous woodland, bit of oak here, some beech and a bit of birch, and this is the 360-degree view, and you can see what I mean. You can see well into the distance. There's still so much deadwood in this woodland that's untouched all the way around. There's the bracken that you can now see over when you're up here, and you can see all the deer, and it's awesome. It's really cool. You can also see into the camp. There's my tripod. Apologies, poor filming mic. Fire pit, tripod, shelters, and you can only get into it from the ladder there. This was an ambitious project when I built this tower, but I remember I uploaded it and I think it got 1 million views in a month, which at the time in our kind of community was probably one of the fastest hitting videos in the bushcraft and kind of camping world at the time. It was very, very fast hitting. It went down really well, and it was pretty much the main episode that put me on the map on the YouTube side of things as well. This was what snowballed my whole channel. The whole of TA Outdoors snowballed and was put on the map from this episode, this Camp Update 11 episode. So it's very close to my heart building this one, and it's falling apart a bit. Some of these sticks here are kind of, they need sorting again, and the lashings need redoing, but this was awesome when I built this. I was so pleased that I could build this on my own, really, with bare hands, a couple of tools, and it was no power tools involved, just hand tools. I was impressed with it, and I think a lot of you guys really enjoyed it, and a lot of you found the channel from this hunting tower. So that is it. Here's the floor. The floor is very rigid and sturdy. I can jump, I can shake to the side, and it doesn't move. It's all very rigid. I covered up the sides here so that small game and animals wouldn't see me from the woodland. I'd obviously just have my head here, and I could also rest my rifle, my gun, on these sticks here. So essentially that was why I built this up around the sides like I have done. So after Camp Update 11, I actually decided that was going to be the last camp update I do. I wasn't going to build anything more at the camp, I was just going to enjoy it. I think I took a 4-month break from the camp, and then I had the bug again and I wanted to build something, and it was another ambitious project, and it was this. So Camp Update 12 I did an overnighter, I came back, I didn't build too much, but Camp Update 13 I came and I built this, which essentially was my secondary shelter at the time, and now it's turned into my primary shelter. Let me go and show you it. It was another ambitious project. It was much bigger than the previous shelter that was here, and we even used a piece of recycled plastic bag from a sandbag from a DIY store to make a small window, and that way if it was glass it wouldn't break if anything blew into it, but it allows light to go into the shelter, which helps me for filming, and it also helps me when I wake up in the morning. I can actually see, sometimes I can see the moon there in the evenings looking out, and obviously the sunrise as well. But it's about head height again, the back of the shelter, and we raised it up. I did this with my dad as well. We raised up the other side as well. We put a tarp roof over it, and we made a wood frame. We made a wood squared frame, then put the tarp on top, and then I put some debris on top of that. Now the debris obviously has pretty much, a lot of it is blown off. It would need topping up, as with most debris shelters. You've got to top it up pretty regularly. But at the moment that's still pretty much waterproof. It's a cheap tarp, so there's some small holes in it underneath. But again, another ambitious project, another big build. That was Camp Update 13, and I'll show you the inside as well. As you can see, it's way bigger than the previous small one that I did. I can actually stand up, I've got loads of headroom. I made a much higher raised bed, which is pretty much the back of the knee height, which makes it perfect for sitting down. So my advice to anyone, if you're making a big camp and you want to make a raised bed, make it to the height of the back of your knees. That way you can sit on it perfectly, almost like a toilet, and you're at a perfect angle, and your knees, your legs, will have that right angle to make it much more comfortable when you're sitting down. For the raised bed, I just used 2 logs there, 2 large logs, and then 2 long horizontal logs there, and then to stop the sagging in the middle, I just put 2 support poles each side. In hindsight, I would advise other people, I've made these, as you can see, the width of the bed is that long. I've made these much longer, which is not a good thing, because if they're overhanging, you sit on the edge like that, they just spring up. So I would make these pretty much so that they are flush almost with the log below, or maybe a tiny bit over, not that far over like over there. Also, I would go for thicker logs, less, well, you could argue it's less soaring, but it's also, you get a bit more of a steadier height when you go for thicker logs, less kind of fluctuation in the bed itself. In hindsight, if I had more time, I could moss and chink these walls, but that's going to take a long time, and it's going to use a lot of moss, a lot of materials. I could use clay. There's no clay in this area, unfortunately. It's gravel. But yes, I could chink those to keep the camp warmer, the wall warmer, and fill in all those gaps. But I'm happy with how it is. And the tarp it's lasted pretty well, a couple of years, but it probably needs redoing that roof. So in the next camp update, I think it was 14, we built this air tunnel. Now this is a tube, a large basically tube that goes all the way under my raised bed over there and outside the other end of the shelter. We put a grid on the front here to stop small mice and field mice and just general small mammals getting stuck in there, going in there. This then creates a draw. So the air, I'll show you the other side in a minute. The air is drawn in from the heat of the fire here, draws that cool air from the other side, and essentially it's pumping air to this fire, because you need oxygen, you need air for a fire to be burning efficiently and the fuel to be burning efficiently. The reason I built the pipe was because where I'd built all these perimeter walls, I'd actually cut off a lot of the airflow within the camp. In hindsight, I wouldn't have built all these walls. I'd have left it much more open, so there's a lot more natural airflow, and that way the fire would burn more efficiently. Unfortunately, I didn't have hindsight, so I'd built this quite a few years ago, those walls, and that meant that it restricted the airflow in the camp, which then meant that the fire was often very smoky. So there you go, there's something I've learnt from doing this. We built this airflow tunnel, which made it much easier to get a draw in here and to get that fire going. I'll show you the other side as well. So here's the outside, the other side of the airflow pipe, which goes under this main shelter and into the camp itself. This is also where the prevailing wind direction comes from. It comes from over there behind the camera, comes this way. So I'm using the natural wind direction in this area to go through the pipe and into the fire, and hopefully to make it burn a lot more efficiently. This was something we built really it was to improve camp. It wasn't like a huge structure or anything. We just dug a trench, put the pipe in, and obviously eventually when I stop using this area in this woodland, I will take all this away. I'm not going to leave any plastic lying around. I will take it all away. But essentially that made the fire pit a lot more efficient. It made life in the camp a lot better, because we weren't getting smoked out all the time. So it's all steady improvements that you learn to figure out from trial and error. At the end of the day, that's how you learn. So we're getting near the end now. Camp update 15. Again, I had a bit of a break in between those camp updates, and that was this wood frame roof. I spent a lot of time thinking about the roof and whether to put a fixed roof on it, on the camp, a completely fixed roof with either shingles or you know, like a debris type roof with an apex and some gables either side. But then I figured that would be a bit more log cabin style, and it was not the style I was going for the camp. I had previously had a tarp as the roof, which was great. It was efficient, but it was also, in the wind and the debris falling on it, it wasn't a really amazing solution. So this is what I came up with. I made a wood frame roof with some log cabin notches. I buried this pole here deep into the ground like I did with the hunting tower, and I lashed another pole the other side to the big tree, and I created this frame. It is at a slight angle, so from where you're looking, it actually should be going that way, and it's going to the back corner, so that if I made it all perfectly level, then the rain would just sit there. So I've made it so that all the water goes over the back corner of that shelter, and that was deliberate. It is at an angle and it's deliberate. I then made an adjustable tarp roof, which I'll show you now. It's very easy to use. You just put your hands underneath and roll it out. I like to do it from up here first in the tower, just to get the tarp rolling. And you can see what I mean. It puts this cover over the camp. So you can see what I mean by the roll-out tarp roof. I can roll this out. I can adjust it to any distance between the frame of the actual shelter itself. Most of the time I keep it all rolled away so that there's loads of light in the camp for filming. But on days like today where it's been raining, I'll just roll this out all the way to the end. The rain will fall off and roll off, hopefully in that far corner over there. And it was the best solution at the time to keep rain out of the camp. I really didn't want to put plastic in the camp, to be honest, or man-made materials in that sense, but I had to put practicality over, you know, sustainability? What would be the word? You guys would know. Anyway, that's why I went for this. Again, when I eventually leave this place, if I do, I will take all this back home with me. But that's how it works. Now I can just roll it up again. Nice and easy. And there we go. Loads more light. Makes life a lot easier. For Bushcraft Camp Update 16, I wanted to improve the heat efficiency of the primary shelter. In order to do that, I used a principle that was created or invented by bushcraft survival expert and instructor Morse Kachansky, or Kachansky. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's Kachansky, but he's a very good Canadian wilderness instructor, and he came up with this idea of using these clear plastic sheeting to permeate the heat, that would allow heat to penetrate in your shelter, and through thermal radiation, I don't know if that's the correct word, really, radiation, but it helps the thermal airflow, convection would it be, where it moves around and it keeps that heat coming into your shelter, and it's almost like a greenhouse effect. It keeps your shelter a lot warmer. So we made this, which is just 2 hooks on here. I'd only use this when I go to bed at night, and essentially this rolls down. I would be on the other side in the shelter, the fire would be going, and that would bounce all the heat in there, keep it in there, and it'd keep me nice and warm. That's the theory anyway. That was Camp Update 16, I believe. Easy to deploy as well, quick deployment. So that was Camp Update 16, I hope I said 16. This is Camp Update 17, which is the last Camp Update, the latest one that I've done. This is the fire pit, where I just upgraded it a bit by adding some much larger rocks here, rather than these small ones. It can be very dry soil. It's quite peaty, so it's, you know, you run the risk of setting the forest alight. But I've got a metal pan underneath. It's all protected underneath. So in hindsight, I'll probably make this a lot bigger, this fire pit. But for now, it does the job. And I can't tell you how many times I've changed this. I would suggest looking into fire pits and doing a bit of research to find out the best solution for you if you are doing this kind of thing. But I finally feel like I've got there anyway with this one. Now, this wasn't a camp update episode where I built this. It was just 2 videos I did on the channel where I built a little dog shelter, really. Previously it was a wall here, but I made it a bit more efficient use of the space so that my dog could have a little shelter that he can go in. And it's only small because he's only a very small dog anyway. He's a little Jack Russell. But that was again another project. I just went for a lean-to style shelter. I had plenty of resources available and I just used what I had. Another thing is the kind of tools that I've used. Obviously I used an axe, saw, knife, your standard tools, but also you can make and craft your own tools when out here in the woods. This was made from, I can't remember what this is made from, I think it's pine. But this is just a mallet. It's a little bit long in the handle, a bit more like a baseball bat. But it just helps preserve, you know, your axe head and things like that. And you can just use this to bash in stakes, because a lot of this camp, a lot of what was involved is bashing in stakes. So yeah, worth looking up how to craft your different tools and things like that. This has been very useful for me. It's a bit battered now, it's a bit mashed up, but I can make another one fairly quickly, and it's just handy for just banging in stakes and yeah, just trying to get camp tasks done. But I keep that in the dry under here because it helps to preserve the life of the tool. So thank you very much, folks, for following me on this camp tour. I know a lot of you have wanted a tour around this bushcraft camp for a while now. I've finally done it. Hopefully it's inspired you or given you some ideas on what you would like to do. I just wanted to say that in hindsight, I wouldn't have made the camp as big as it is. Generally with bushcraft, the principle is that you leave no trace. And you try and create a minimal footprint when you're out in the woods, be it with a campfire, be it with a shelter, be it just being out in a certain area. You gotta think of nature first, really, and you've got to think of how you would stumble across something, how you would want to find it. I personally like seeing nature at its most rawest without any man-made things there. But at the same time, this is private land. I'm on private land here. I would never do this on public land. I would never suggest to anyone to go and do it on public land. A number of reasons, really. 2 reasons, really. One, it's probably illegal to do this on public land. 2, it would probably get trashed by other people. Certainly here in the UK, it's likely to get trashed by someone who stumbles across it. But yeah, in hindsight, I wouldn't have built it as big. I wouldn't have made such a big thing of it. I just got carried away. I got very into it. I really enjoyed doing it. I got into the building process. I enjoyed, as a kid, using things like Connects and Meccano, Lego, and just, I was always into building. When I was younger, I wanted to get into that sort of thing. So I guess that's what it was in a way. It's kind of part of my childhood. I know some could argue that it's obviously it's very impractical in that sense, that if I was going out on a wilderness hike somewhere, I wouldn't build something like this because I simply wouldn't have the time. And if I was moving and going on to different spots and traveling, I would nowhere near build a shelter like this. I would build a very small and minimal shelter. This was just a project of mine where I had permission. I'm on private land. The whole thing, the entire fort or camp, is built from dead wood. It's all the Scots pine tree, which is a very common tree here in the UK. It's quite easy to identify. It has a dark sort of lower end to the trunk. You can see them all behind me. And as you look up, they kind of go an orangey brown. It's also, the pine needles are quite easy to identify as well. There's small Scots pine needles there. You can actually use the pine needles from the tree for tea, and you can make a tea. It's packed full of vitamin C's. It's very, very good for you. It's quite a resourceful tree. It's usually quite resinous. It's easy for fire lighting. But the reason it's so straight, a lot of questions are, why is your camp so straight? How do you get such straight sticks? And that is not because of the tree species itself, but it's because of the competition that that tree has with all the other trees around it. At the end of the day, trees are fighting for sunlight. That's what they want. That's what they need for photosynthesis. They need the sunlight. So they're fighting for it. And because they're fighting for it, they're all growing as fast as they can upwards. When they've got no competition, a tree, for example, a lone oak tree in a field, you'll see it will be a really wide, broad tree, a lovely broad tree. And that's because it's got no competition. It can get all that sunlight as the sun moves around the sky, and that's why the branches grow out. When you're in a very dense woodland, the trees will tend to grow straight up, because they can't go out, because they won't get sunlight if they go out. They need to get up to compete with their friends to get that sunlight. I know it sounds a bit basic, but that's how this wood is so straight, is because all these Scots pine trees here are very, very dense, and the woodland is very dense. Not behind me, but this side is very dense, so they all grow really, really straight. And that's how I've got such straight wood. And you can see where they've grown straight, they blow into each other, they fall down. They've only got very shallow roots as well, so they fall down all the time. So there's endless resources at the moment. So my advice to anyone is, if you're going to go out and build something, have a think about the resources that you have available. Have a think about the concept of leaving no trace. Eventually I will leave no trace here, and there will be no bushcraft camp, because I'll either take it down or it will rot away, and I'll take down the man-made materials. Either way, it will go back to nature. But the main thing is that I haven't gone out cutting down live trees. I've used dead standing, which is a tree that's dead. It's got no leaves on it. It's either snapped off at the top and the roots are still there and the system's still holding it together, but it's a dead tree. That's called dead standing. Or it's dead fall, so it's fallen over. Most of this is dead fall, where it's all littered around the forest floor. But that's my advice to you. Be careful, obviously, using tools and sharp tools. Do your research. My advice really is build something small. If you're going camping, or if you're doing, this is not survival. This isn't survival at all. This is just camp building. But if you're going out there and you want to learn about this kind of thing, you only need to build a small shelter, a little lean-to, or like I started at the very beginning, just an A-frame shelter, a one-man A-frame shelter. You don't need to build a huge camp like this. It's just something that I've done, and I've kind of left there essentially, but I've also done it to learn along the way, and I learned a lot of things along the way about building in general, about bushcraft. I've practiced so much bushcraft here, I've practiced skills here. I just learnt loads along the way, and I've got to thank you guys really for stumbling upon those of you that stumbled upon the Bushcraft Camp videos and subscribed. I've got to really thank you for that. I do appreciate it, and I'm very grateful to have you on board and to follow me on the journey. The addition behind it, you might not be able to see it, but just here is the cabin, the pallet wood cabin. That was another project I did with my dad, a whole new series that, if you haven't seen it, pop some links to all those in the series in the description below. But I just want to say thank you so much for watching this episode. I've got some solo ones coming up as well. Yeah, thank you so much, and it's trip time. I'm going on some more trips. Yeah, moving about a bit. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you real soon.
Come you adolescent morning, longest day born anew, a cup of sorrow with the early dew. Come you endless morning, come and tell me what to do, 'cause I'd do anything for me. You get me up and get me through. Oh, 'cause as the seasons fade, I'll come back someday. As the seasons will fade, I will come back someday. Your eyes, they taste like hollow wine. Your eyes, they taste like